this thing that people are saying, doesn't happen, and everyone's so careful, and no one would just, transition people without mental health assessments, or, that people would be careful about those who have been traumatized or seem to have personality disorders, or that, that type of patient would not be, transitioned as a kid. I'm like, no, that I've seen it. So which is really sad. It's really sad because, you're taking some of the most vulnerable and traumatized individuals, and you're applying what I would call ideological, care to them, rather than trying to meet their primary needs.
My guest today is Dr. Kristopher Kaliebe, a professor of psychiatry at the University of South Florida. He is a distinguished fellow at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, or ACAP. He is also board certified in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and forensic psychiatry. That means he is an expert witness. Today, he gives us his expert witness on the madness of medical policy capture by gender activists. Dr. Kaliebe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
For our listeners who don't know you, can you please take this moment to just tell us something about yourself?
I'm right now sort of late in my career, so there's a lot to say. I'll try to be brief. I trained in general psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and child and adolescent psychiatry, but my professional career, especially up until just recently, has mostly been as a clinician, actually seeing patients myself or working in collaborative teams, and as an educator. So my first number of years, I was at LSU Health Science Center in New Orleans, and I was very active in teaching at all levels: medical students, general psychiatry residents, other professionals, child psychiatry residents. And then in 2016, I moved back to Tampa, where I'm from, and now I'm doing something similar at the University of South Florida. Along the way, I have had a number of academic interests, so I have publications on a wide range of topics. I have many presentations at, within various professional associations on a number of topics. It's floated around from things such as collaborative care, nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, mind-body techniques. Also, I have an interest in have publications and presentations on working in the justice system. Right now, I work at 7 juvenile correctional centers. That's a lot for me. I have been moving around through the years because you go from one facility to the next. And so while I work, for the university, I go out to the facilities around me. When I was in Louisiana, I was doing the same. So I've been like around halftime doing juvenile corrections. So I've seen kids that are locked up. And then when I've worked, in Louisiana, I was working almost exclusively in federally qualified health centers, which are, community clinics that take all comers, and they sort of a mission to serve, underserved and disadvantaged populations. And we were doing a lot of collaborative care, so working with pediatricians and family practice docs and other ones to help provide, mental health care. That being said, I've been a skeptic or sort of somewhat displeased with some of our models in psychiatry. So I'm trying to aim for more holistic care, for taking care of the basics of health, for more psychotherapy and psychosocial supports for individuals. And I think a lot of people are acknowledging and understand that we're often a medication first culture, and our medical system is heavy, medication heavy. So I've been skeptical about that. So I've always had an interest in psychotherapy. I've done a lot of psychotherapy with my patients. I enjoy doing psychotherapy. I think it's really important. Not every psychiatrist does psychotherapy, even though it's a well-established and evidence-based approach to all sorts of different problems. And those who come to psychotherapy wanting to change can make, really impressive changes in themselves. And so, targeted in the right way, in the right place, psychotherapy is a super important part of mental health care. Yet I think there's bad psychotherapy too, and it can be overused and used inappropriately. And so I'm now in the middle of something that's quite different in that I moved from working in corrections and being a clinician and training to be part of the sort of dialogue and as you said, involved with some forensic testimony, some expert testimony regarding gender issues. And I got pulled into it because I started to see a new wave of patients that really didn't seem to exist previously. And I was being told to care for them in ways that seemed different than everything that we had been doing previously, and actually went up against and was contrary to a lot of the ways that I've been taught to do psychotherapy and approach patients and weigh risks and benefits and consider ethics. And so I felt like if I can't, speak my mind and speak up for this, who can? Because I was in a position of, being well established with the professional organizations, have a large record of, public of presentations and writings and all the stuff showing myself to be a psychiatrist with a broad set of interests and, sort of really trying to move the field, I would say, forward and for better care for more people, more efficient, high value. And I saw this as being, in a lot of ways, the opposite of that. And once you sort of start to dip your toe in this issue, there's so much a need for people to, speak freely on it and analyze the data and sort of engage, especially on the side of caution and concern, that I felt like, okay, well, now that I've dipped my toe in, I need to, be vocal. And because I do forensic testimony and already was an expert in sort of in general in psychiatry, I was a natural person to get involved with legal cases, as I'm already familiar with that part of medicine and psychiatry.
You have, for example, consulted on the use of puberty blockers in a minor. You have consulted on psychotherapy for detransitioners. So you have a lot of experiences in this space, and many of them involve being an expert witness. Can you talk about any of the cases that you've given testimony for? I am particularly interested in Miller v. Alabama, which involves ACAP and the AMA, just because that's my home state.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's public knowledge, of course, that I was one of the experts used by the state of Alabama in their case, Miller v. Alabama, and they challenged, the use of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, and did it in a quite forceful way. The legal team for the state of Alabama was really well organized and thoughtful regarding their approach. And I wrote an initial report for Alabama. And then when they were able to get access to the documents of the Department of Health and Human Services and also of WPATH, I was a reviewer of those internal documents. And that report, my supplemental report, has been made public. So, it was released with a trove of other reports that the state released a while back, well before the latest Scarametti Supreme Court case. So that's really available. And then also I testified for the state of Florida. And, due to sunshine laws, my report for Florida was also immediately made, freely available. So, I'm well on the record and am privy to a few things that I think, has bled out into the general public, so more people know about the internal dealings that have sort of got us where we're at with gender medicine in particular. But yeah, that I was active in those cases, and what I've had to write is freely available. So if people want to read those reports, they can get them.
Let me follow up by just asking, having testified in a number of these cases that involve gender woo, do you notice any patterns in what you're having to say? Is there like, oh, wow, I'm having to go over these, five or six same points every time. Like I could just do the same brief every time, copy and paste this part of it for just about everything that I do. Like, is there some commonality that you find?
Yes, we're debating um, a few things, but I think the crux of this is we are debating the trustworthiness of those who deem themselves experts in youth gender medicine. And if you believe that those who treat the kids with gender related distress and who have experience working in gender clinics are the quote unquote experts, and they can sort of make justifications for doing what they want to do, then this makes sense, right? So I mean, that's the only way I would say that these kind of things make sense, is if you defer to them as experts and they say that this is really good and they say it's very helpful, and you believe them because they're experts and they work in these clinics. And I think that has been a default because we live in a society that is incredibly complex, and we can't be good. I don't know how to fix my own car. I can't fix my iPhone if it breaks. We depend on other people to specialize in things, and we assume that those who call themselves an expert in something are trustworthy, and that they've done the homework, we'll say, to justify their claims about their area of expertise. And in the area of youth gender medicine in total, but in particular in youth gender medicine, um, you can easily ascertain that this is a field that has been very comfortable making statements of certitude about things that they cannot be certain, and there's no evidence that makes them where they should be certain, and seem to have certitude about outcomes in a experimental, treatment, that there's no way we could have long-term outcomes because, as I put in my reports, usually, I started medical school in 1995. I went through my residencies. Anyone who knows how many people you see during residency, you're like super busy. You see tons of kids. When I was in Louisiana, I was a really busy professional. I worked with social workers, pediatricians, family practice docs, psychologists. No one in my sphere ever brought to me a case of youth-related gender distress, and I never saw a kid. I mean, we're talking about 10,000, patient visits at least individually, in addition to all my consultations. So we're talking, 20 years of medical practice with zero gender distressed kids. And as I have mentioned, every once in a while, it's not every day, this is not the usual, but every once in a while, I'm supervising my resident clinic, and we can have three gender related distress patients in one clinic now. So, how can a phenomenon go to zero over 20 years, and now you can have three gender related stress in a half day, clinic with four residents, or however many I'm supervising that day? So, um, I know, there's a lot of places I can go with that, but I'd say the whole crux of this depends on the trustworthiness of those people who call themselves gender experts.
You were just describing how you spent so long being a professional psychiatrist and you saw no cases of gender dysphoria. And then suddenly, after 2016, there's an explosion in cases, a whole new population. This all should have raised red flags, but it didn't, because the people behind this push were not doing evidence-based medicine. So let's talk about the evidence of what is actually going on. You have said that screens, especially in our pockets, played a key role in this. And of course, Jonathan Haidt and others have written extensively about this. Can you elaborate on that connection? Because I think you explain it very well.
The intersection between development and electronics and technology has always been a fascinating and important subject to me because you can see that how what technologies are available to children and affecting children alters over time and alters the socialization and enculturation of the cohorts of kids. And when my grandma grew up in the middle of Chicago, born in 1903 or 1909, she would have only really gotten information from those people right around her. So she would have been neighborhood heavy, family heavy, church heavy, that's where the information was. And when she was a teenager, I believe, they finally got a phone in the building and you could go down to the, switchboard and put money in the phone and be able to contact. And the radio had sort of started at that time. They had like a phonograph you could wind apparently when she was a child. But you can see how the information flow into her ears and into her eyes would be very local. It would be very restricted. All through human history, people have been very careful about what kind of information goes into a child's mind. And even Plato, in his Ideal Republic, said that children should only hear, stories of virtue that, and I'll translate this in a little into modern psychology, but basically that are developmentally appropriate, simple stories of virtue that become more complex, but in order to train them about what's important and how to see the world. Well, we had a dual expansion in the last 20 years in that both the outgrowth of smartphones. We had the internet, but then we have smartphones and we had social media come at the same time. And when did all that hit? When did we have a huge change from a, real world or more identity based, which, we had less of over time, even in previous generations. But when did it hit really big time? And about 2012 was the year that kids were both started to get on social media and phones. And if you think of the amount of information that's going into the brains of children and how it became disproportionately flowing through electronic devices and uncontrolled devices that we're able to access all sorts of information from all over the world, any corner of the internet now could get into a child's head. And so the protective layers and the cultural supports and things that have been shaped up over generations, maybe hundreds, maybe if you talk about religion for like thousands of years, right? So we've been shaping up these ways to train our kids. And then all of a sudden that information had gotten displaced by the information that's available via social media, via the internet, via people's phones and computers. And in 2012 is just about the time that you start seeing these increases in depression and anxiety and a number of identity related to disorders, all going up. And so I think we do have to question this experiment that we've been running on our kids and be very mindful and cautious about what they're exposed to. And then simultaneously, one of our more trusted cultural organizations, our schools, also started moving towards teaching gender ideology in schools, bringing that to children in their school, which is a place of authority and kids would take very seriously. So I think you had multiple things going on, but I do not think that you can look at this phenomenon and you know it from cases because you can read people's accounts and you can just it's freely available to see that many kids find out about their sort of gender related distress or how to conceptualize it through the internet, through Reddit groups, through these other things. Obviously, this was not a thing spontaneously arising because it would have been arising for all the previous generations if that was the case. This is a sculpted up socialization and culturation issue that seemed to flow from access to these ideas, wherever kids have been finding them. And so, unfortunately, while parents were not promoting or wanting these ideas for the most part, they were getting into children's heads, and the distress of many ways was increasing at this time. Suicide rates, self-harm, hospitalizations, depression, anxiety, all of them going up. But right at that same time, gender-related distress, explodes. And so could it be a coincidence that those phenomenons are happening at the same time? I think that's, pretty hard to believe, but some people appear to believe that.
Working backwards for just a moment, 2011, I believe, is when smartphones overtook flip phones. All right. So everybody has a little a worry machine in their pocket in the classroom in 2012. But working back even further from there, the smartphone is, I believe, invented in 2006 or seven, 3 years before that. So 2003, I was sitting on a porch talking to a friend of mine, and we were going over some science fiction ideas, just bouncing back and forth. And I asked him what he thought about the idea of a child who is born with the full knowledge of humanity connected to their brain already. And he said that child would be fucked up. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yes.
wrote in you wrote in 2022 that the evidence showed, and I quote, the spread of beliefs about gender identity, such that all individuals should consider and question their gender identity, appears quite plausibly capable of significantly increasing the incidence of gender dysphoria. This is especially true as traditional sources of knowledge about the world, such as families, school, local culture, and religion, have been replaced by what children observe on electronic screens. You add, it is plausible and probable that ideological and social factors underlie the increase in gender dysphoria. So there's a whole discussion around the cult-like nature of this gender beast. That statement seems as close as a professional psychologist might come to saying it's a cult. Can you speak to the similarities or differences between the cult mind and the gender woo mind? What's going on in the psychology there that might be the same or different? Is that something you can speak to?
Well, I think that um, I will speak a little to it, although I probably won't say too much. I think that it is a level of analysis, the comparison between, because it does seem that with the whole idea of gender affirmation and gender ideology, that we are being asked to join a belief system that prioritizes a self-identification over what we would traditionally use to identify. Um, Personal identity is not something that we usually would be thinking we could choose and do choose in many ways. Like for instance, uh, I'm an older white guy. I can't say I'm a Korean teenage girl and then have people believe that, right? I can't say that I'm German speaking if I'm not. I can't say, I could say these things, but people wouldn't believe them, right? People shouldn't necessarily believe people's self-identification. But in this gender space, we are asked to believe things, and it is kind of an all or nothing. So you must join and you must believe and you must affirm, and then you're a good person and you're in the group, or you're a bad person and you're going to be stigmatized as a transphobe if you raise, the question of whether this child is truly, because they say they're a girl, that they're a girl, right? Or say that they're a boy, that they're a boy. So there is this all or nothing phenomenon because the whole issue requires, when you're talking about social affirmation of children, it is a group activity. It's interesting because in mental health, we're usually counseling people to, for one, maybe not take appearances of, that's not the important thing, that how you look is not as important as how you feel, and that you don't want to be over focused on external appearance. So for one, it flips that script around. But for two, we're usually asking patients and children, even if we're doing therapy with them, to learn to accept the world as it is and to try to work with themselves and the world based in reality. And in this case, we're asking everyone to go along with something that's not based in reality. And we're creating social pressures to do so. And there certainly are a lot of dogmas that go along with gender ideology that seem, pseudo-religious. And there are also there's blasphemy. There's things you can't say. There's heretics there's, witch hunts. There's all sorts of things that go along with like a religious. So the framework is good. I think that it is certainly reasonable to have this comparison. I think the caution that I would have is if we're trying to convince the people who are more on the left and more sympathetic, that my feeling is like we're trying to have a respectful dialogue and move things forward. And so, I feel like get caught because sometimes it's hard to um, pay, so there's just some ideas that I feel are not, that I don't need to go back and forth about some of the basics of reality, so it's hard for me. But I do think we're trying to help people who have been enculturated in a certain way feel that way is doesn't make sense and is not really good for children. And so I wouldn't personally, I think that it's a comparison that's apt, but I wouldn't use the term of like calling it a cult or like that, more for those type of reasons, that I just feel like, we're trying to be sensitive to those who have got caught up in this. Many of them, with meaning to do good and meaning to have goodwill, but some of them not, some of them not. So I don't use the term cult, but I understand why people would.
I have called it ersatz religiosity before. Ersatz is a word that means a substitute, but it infers the meaning that the substitute is not as good as the real thing, that something is being replaced, and the thing which is replacing it is actually causing harm in this case, an iatrogenic harm. You have mentioned a cognitive shortcut before known as attribution substitution. That's when we substitute a simple moral judgment for complex thought, right? This is one of the more culty aspects. I would argue that the thought terminating cliches of gender woo are very culty. You write that, quote, this common cognitive bias causes humans to intuitively believe viewpoints which appear virtuous, especially ideas which seem widely held within their social group. Affirmative care does sound compassionate and supportive, and these minor semantics can have a surprising influence. So would you agree that like the phrase save the trans kids is where this all goes wrong? It's salvific. We're going to save the trans kids. It sort of grabs onto some sort of instinct in people that says you're going to be a good person by doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of social psychology at work, and that the social psychology is often trumping sorry to use that word, but the trumping rationality. So yes, when you get into groups, it is really easy for people to create moral paradigms and basically create an impression of a simple moral, standard that we should you hold. And in this case, affirmation all the time and affirmative treatments and all this was held up as a civil right, as a important social good, and those who would raise questions or prioritize, safeguarding children or caution or evidence, those are put on the other side of this good bad and must be attacked and must be bad people for raising those questions. And so, yes, the attribution, substitution, all or nothing type of thinking, I think is clearly at work here. And sadly, everyone who goes into mental health these days is trained about cognitive biases and is trained about cognitive distortions. And even those who are the old timers in psychiatry were trained about psychodynamics and how we fool ourselves and how we repress and how we project and how so the human irrationality has been a part of mental health, for really some of the primary underpinnings of our approaches in mental health. And so it's amazing to me that mental health professionals have really, failed to see their own blind spots and have endorsed things that, are just easily easily debunked and seem to be more based on moral codes than evidence or facts. But that's what human beings do. It just shows that none of us are immune. And it's especially true when we get into groups and we have, tribal identities.
There's another conversation that this is all a kind of delayed development, that it's getting the kids stuck in emotional reasoning where they reason according to what they feel and not what they know. They don't want to grow up to be coldly rational like us old guys. And they have this outlet to being Peter Pan, basically. I was looking at Vivian Musk, who was trying to pass as a debutante recently. The video clips are just excruciating to watch. Is that a kind of placebo effect? Because you've talked about that before, that it feels like you're growing up when you're not. Would you agree that avoidance is a strategy for these kids? Is that something that's going on?
Well, I don't think that there's any doubt that there's a large subsegment of this that is avoidance. There's lots of pools of patients that go into these things for different reasons, but it seems like in general, kids are more and more afraid of doing adult things growing up. If you've noticed, if you have any teenagers these days, when I was a kid, the day you turned 16, you got your driver's license, right? I mean, everyone wanted to drive, everyone wanted independence, everyone wanted to go. I mean, maybe we were too feral, and ended up the way we are because of that, but we were not. We all wanted to grow up, we wanted to be adults. We wanted to, and these days you have a very extended childhood. I mean, especially with a graduate school and college and, kids today in college, they're constantly talking, but they're not really independent like we were. I mean, due to the prices of long distance phone calls, I would call once a month after Sunday night after 12 to talk to my parents. And that was it was usually pretty quick, right? Part of it was about money, but part of it was just, I'm off at college on my own and we just didn't have the need to be so connected. And so, yeah, this is within a whole cohort of young people that seem to have some difficulties, growing up and are often delaying that process. And we've probably really failed them all quite a bit by not letting them, get out and skin their knee and do things on their own and be more independent. And for that subsegment that are more worried and more anxious and more, when you avoid, anxieties just get worse. And so unfortunately, in reality, we have been making them worse by accommodating the anxieties and accommodating the avoidance. And I don't think any doubt that many of these kids don't want to grow up. And that's part of what is going on.
Speaking of patient pools, because one of the tells about gender woo is how it doesn't exclude anyone, right? It wants to include everyone. And one of those pools came up when we were in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago. You told me a story that I would call unbelievable, except that it involves gender woo. And I learned a long time ago to believe gender woo is capable of anything. And then I was interviewing Jamie Reed a month ago, and she casually mentioned that cases like this have become more common. So, talk about medicalized gender identity in minors who are in detention. Basically, estrogen is seen as a way to calm them down or something. This just seems insane. Talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I live in a state that does not endorse giving, hormones or um, puberty blockers or any of that to minors. And so in theory, we shouldn't currently have those problems. But there was before the time that there was restrictions, I was seeing patients and I did see patients who, had transitions prior to them coming into the, justice system. And so yes, this thing that people are saying, doesn't happen and everyone's so careful and no one would just, transition people without mental health assessments or, that people would be careful about those who have been traumatized or seem to have personality disorders or that, that type of patient would not be, transitioned as a kid. I'm like, no, that I've seen it. So which is really sad. It's really sad because, you're taking some of the most vulnerable and traumatized individuals and you're applying what I would call ideological, care to them rather than trying to meet their primary needs. It is terrible. And I don't know if you saw the recent article out of Finland, but they just looked at their adult clinics and personality disorders. And it's well known that gender identity issues and gender dysphoria is related to personality disorders, and especially borderline personality disorder is the one with the most with the heaviest relationship. So many times more patients with in gender clinics have borderline personality disorder, and in fact changes in gender identity are part of the criteria for borderline personality disorder. But borderlines keep changing their identity. So, fixing someone with hormones or surgeries who has that condition would seem especially, poor treatment, especially if they were a child or a minor or even a young adult. It seems like terrible, clinical care. But yes, we do have kids in these systems who, have gender related issues. And I've seen some really not good, and some of them are public safety concerns for sure, right? So this is a real challenge.
All the protections, quote unquote, that we are supposed to give people with gender dysphoria or who don't even have dysphoria, but just identify as having dysphoria, all of it is supposedly justified by the minority stress model. Are you able to talk about this foundational pillar of gender ideology? What is the actual science? And I'm not talking about the social science, which is the WNBA of science. I mean the actual real hard science of your field. What does it tell us about this idea that people who are trans are just, especially stigmatized and just, will definitely suffer in life from being in a transphobic world. What about that?
Mhm. Yeah. The whole idea of minority stress, just like many things that are that take on a life of their own. And I think the term concept creep is which Haslam coined in 2016 with a really, insightful paper. Uh, Things that have some truth to them in a certain context both get softened over time and get expanded over time. So what I mean by that is if you take like something, let's say bullying, that in the olden days might have been thought of as someone really getting beaten, uh, and that was what bullying was, kids who are really severely harassed. And then over time, bullying begins to mean that someone, looked at them funny or, made one comment to them or said something they didn't like, or even that they just misunderstand something. So, it expands to other things, and it also it doesn't have to be as severe. I mean, kids are always in conflict, and so there is conflict, and, bullying, it can be a real thing, and we need the concept. Well, to relate that to minority stress, are those who are, minoritized under more stress in a number of ways? Yes, 100%. This is a concept that has validity. So if you're, let's say, the only or one of a few in a group of many, you're going to stand out. So if that's a racial, ethnic, whatever the case is, if you're a small group, or an individual, and there's no one else, kind of like you. Especially if that means also that you have different preferences or values or a way of life that's different, that's going to be, a challenge, right? And so, this is a uh, concept that was applied to homosexuals, especially, and which started at a time when they were being treated very badly by society. And that's a whole another conversation, which I can be happy to talk about. But obviously, we've had a society that has been not as welcoming and not as open to homosexuality as we should, because obviously same-sex attraction is part of, the human range of experiences, and pathologizing it is, terrible, and we should, try not to do that. And that minority stress was initially applied under those circumstances, which makes total sense when you're talking about, especially, let's say, go back 30, 40, 50 years, and you're applying it to homosexuality. Well, that term has now gotten, what I would say, the concept has creeped all the way to gender identity. And they're using it like, oh, this pool is under minority stress, and that's why they hurt themselves, and that's why they're anxious, and that's why they're depressed and all that. Yet when you look at the data, it really looks like, and there's some from the Toronto clinic, and there's a number of places where they've looked at, or the kids who have gender dysphoria, and this is especially true with the adolescent onset that have lots of comorbidities, that they already had issues with depression and anxiety and self-harm and all these things before they identified as transgender, before the gender dysphoria. So minority stress is a really, um, I would say, self-defeating and poisonous label to apply to this population that already had these struggles before they had gender dysphoria. And in fact, if you're going to sort of tell people who adopt, a transgender identity or experience gender dysphoria, that their problems are related to everyone else, and that's all those other bad people are why are depressed, anxious, self-harming, whatever other comorbidities you're having. um you're just digging them into an us versus them paradigm, and you're likely preventing them from looking inside themselves and trying to understand themselves better and make better sense of the world and work out of those problems, which for the most part pre-existed their gender dysphoria. the depression, the anxiety, the self-harm, and those type of things. So, it seems obvious that we are just misapplying this minority stress theory in order to justify transitions and other things for this population that already has significant mental health problems, but we would like to blame that, and you can see how convenient that is, because if society is being blamed, well, then we are justified in all our efforts to change society in order to accommodate this population. And obviously, there's been a huge push to accommodate, like men playing women's sports. That idea comes from this whole, oh, this poor population is so stressed that we have to, they would be so terrible for them if they had to play sports in their actual sex category. Which, in the end is just terrible for everyone. So unfortunately, yeah, the minority stress theory has escaped the lab, as they say, and has gone all through the dialogues related to this, and is promoted by people who have that, said they want to promote this ideological agenda of normalizing gender distress and saying that everyone else has caused the problems. But for the most part, those problems were there before the gender distress.
You are in some of these organizations that have been infected by social justice advocacy that took over the committees and set the policies. It's been hard to get a hearing for skepticism. The journals simply won't allow it, or they do, and then they bend over backwards to please the activists with withdrawing the research or modifying the research or commenting on it or whatever. Can you just talk about your experiences in your professional world trying to raise this awareness?
Yeah, it's been incredibly disappointing that the medical professional organizations that I am a member of have gotten caught up in such ideological and tribal viewpoints. If you look at where a lot of academia has gone in the last 20, 30 years, it's not surprising, because most of the leadership of psychiatric professional organizations, if you look at who's in the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, or who's in the ACAP, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, they are mostly people who are academic, who are at academic facility, have academic backgrounds and credentials, and so they reflect what has gone on in academia and have a sensibility that is, I would consider myself classical liberal. I want free speech. I want dialogue ideas. I don't want tribalism on the left or on the right. I would like us to, I'd like universities to prioritize truth. And you would think that I never thought it would get to the medical associations. I was foolishly thought, well, that's just in universities and academia, and maybe we'll have a little bit of it, but it'll get it swatted back. And when I first started seeing it, I was like, it'll just self-correct. It's going to go away. Yeah, there's some terrible papers that they're putting in our journals that are clearly just, advocacy and ideology, but someone's going to write a letter to the editor and then it'll be corrected. And then, well, it didn't go down that way. It didn't happen that way. And so, unfortunately, if you look at the American Medical Association too, Endocrine Society, all those that are involved with this gender war, you'll see that they also have, climate change committees, and, we're involved with anti-racism and all these, so they clustering around these social, advocacy roles. And, these are all important topics, and we should have, open discussion on them. And I'm not, I would love for us to have nuanced, good discussions on race and, environmental issues and all that kind of stuff. But for one, environmental issues aren't the main reason that people go to psychiatrists, right? Like, we need to do our bread and butter and not make proclamations on stuff that, is outside of our field, because I don't know why anyone would trust us or believe us on that. But again, we've been caught up in anything that seems like it's goes along with left progressive ideology. All these professional organizations have been behind it, and obviously this gender piece is a part of that. And so, yes, we've been absolutely since about 2018 caught up in these things, and seemingly those in the professional organizations have been unwilling, to actually just have nuanced scientific or scholarly debate like we should. And so I've seen it. I saw it at the American Academy of Pediatrics because I was the liaison between ACAP and them, and they went full on, you used the colloquial term woke about 2018 with some of their proclamations, and sadly, that's just where they still are. Um, I have been at ACAP and within APA, the same thing. There's and they don't make they're so non-self-aware, or they prefer to pretend, or I mean more cynically, they know that many of their members don't agree, but the ones in control don't want to forum any disagreement because I think they're nervous because they know the facts are not on their side regarding many of the things they're promoting. And back to the whole moralization and tribalism, they want us to become a single-minded tribe, which then they can weaponize versus their perceived enemies. And so unfortunately that level of discourse is what passes for okay, within our professional organizations. And they're perfectly fine suppressing, scholarly discourse, whether that means the program committees for the annual meetings have been terrible. APA has let two things through. One of them I was involved with this year. And this year I am speaking on the CAS review at ACAP. But this is after many, many, submissions. And the journals still have published zero. The ACAP journal has published zero letters to the editor, articles, primary articles, raising any kind of questions when this is clearly being debated everywhere out in the world, yet no debate can be had in the journals of the major psychiatric associations or the Endocrine Society or the American Academy of Pediatrics. They've all decided we're going to suppress any debate within our journals. We're not having it. But they're in a tough position because they've all come out with advocacy positions that are for gender care, right? So they've already come out as a professional organization saying, hey, we support this, we're behind it, we're affirmative, anything else is terrible, we have a high certainty in this. And so you can see right there what the tension is. How can you be an advocacy organization and a scientific organization too? Right. So they've compromised, they've decided basically we'd rather be an advocacy organization and, basically we'll pretend that the science is there and we were not going to stifle any debate. And, this all is acting on individual, tribal levels, but they have, it's been terrible. It's been terrible. And unfortunately, many members of all of these professional organizations have reached out to me and sent me emails or talked to me or at the meetings and were like, I would love to, you keep doing what you're doing. It's great. This is terrible. We need to change things, but many of them work at places. If you work at a Northeastern or California university or, you're going to be in major professional problems and you're going to be stressed and you might be concerned for your safety if you speak honestly on these issues. So these are all real, problems that maybe are going to start getting better, sometime soon. Or maybe not. I hope so. I hope we change it around, but they've definitely chosen advocacy over science. And I think, thank goodness, that we have a rise of a couple, in their ashes. We have new organizations, and there's two academic organizations, or one's a therapy organization that I really like. One's called Open Therapy Institute, and they are promoting taking ideology out of therapy, which of course therapy should be about the individual, and good therapy is not social justice therapy. It is therapy about the needs of that. We're prioritizing that patients and we're trying to help populations that seem to be stigmatized by the professional groups that are unfortunately, making all sorts of negative proclamations about groups of people in a way that you would think mental health professionals never would, but they do. And Heterodox Academy, which is really supporting, and FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. They're all promoting, the open dialogue, more conversation, more, in a nonpartisan, let's just have more talking and let's return to what I would call classical liberalism, where universities, prioritize truth and scholarly dialogue and are not caught up in tribalism. So I hope that answers that question. But yeah, I've seen some terrible stuff.
This happened in the West. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. There's an acronym WEIRD, and there's a whole body of literature about how we socially construct mental illness. So I was going to ask you what it is about the Western mind, you think, that made the transgender belief possible. But after talking to you, I'm wondering if the thing that we're looking at is expertise. Experts became the new priests. And this new priest class set aside the science for activism, is what it sounds like. Does that kind of sum up what you think has happened?
Well, I like both of those questions, but yes, I mean, I do think, like, imagine how powerful it is for you to be the person that decides who gets a gender transition or not, especially within this highly um, pseudo religious, or what was the Erstot's religious group, and now you're the one with the key to this special status. And so I do think, that there's some, there've been books. I have like about a 30-year-old, probably 40-year-old book about, psychiatrists as witch doctors, and that there is some parallels, right? So, for better or worse, we need people that are modern day shamans that heal, and maybe there's some mystical or interpersonal or unknowable pieces to being a mental health professional, and that might be okay, that might be fine. But when it goes off the rails like this, it's not fine, and we're leading people to places that just cause harm for the individual and also for the group. And so yeah, I do think that there is something about the professional organizations, and you have to think about this idea of hubris, and how not humble people have to be in order to embark on some of these interventions with such confidence, even in the face of no evidence, or very little evidence, certainly no long-term evidence. And so, yes, I think that the failure, there's something about creating our, modern universities are sort of like modern day monasteries, with that can't be challenged. And then have these letters after your name, and you're seen as all powerful, and, easy for you to believe whatever you believe, because who could challenge you, because you have these letters and you're in this position. And so, yeah, but I would also say you're correct on this Joseph Heinrich's idea of Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, in that shapes up a certain type of mind that is very conducive to global, wide concepts like capitalism and democracy. And, we can roll with those things. And they seem to be that shaped up psychology in the Western world. Um, is flexible in a number of ways to our benefit. But we may be so flexible in some of the things that we believe that are sort of more like principles or these wide concepts. That same proclivity may also render us more susceptible to believing in other sort of quote unquote truths, such as, everyone has a gender identity and it's all how they feel. And, but, we can't describe it other than by using the word gender. But yeah, so I do think there is something about the Western world that is special and has contributed to these problems, and they do seem to be more in the Western world than anywhere else. And I would also say you could look into the work of Paul Vassi, who, has studied like the Fafafini and the Mouche. And while different cultures have carved out spaces for gender non-conforming people, which I think, can be um, a nice way to deal with the compromises and trade-offs that exist, especially with like very gender non-conforming people who may not fit in well. And we do need to figure out a way to help gender non-conforming people fit in and have a good life and be a part of our society. But in those places, none of them believe that they're the actual other sex. That is not part of that belief system. And so, yeah, it seems like something about the weird psychology, which has been shaped up, over a long, long period of time through a number of forces, may have left us susceptible. And then back to your comment about, especially if you have leaders that come from fancy universities and have, no big, letters after their names, they can lead us to some pretty crazy places. And apparently they have.
What are you doing next that you can talk about, and where can listeners find you?
Well, I don't, I would, if I had more time, I would like to write a book, but right now I'm just really busy with both some, forensic cases, but I have an active clinical practice. I teach residents, at the University of South Florida, both adult and child psychiatry. I cover, the facilities, and I'm trying to get out some writing when I can. I think I had just sent you a recent paper that I co-authored, um, about the failures of the process in youth gender medicine, how the usual standards of science and discourse and ethics have been thrown out the window. Um, but yeah, I have a lot of papers to write in my head, but not enough time to write them. So I'm not sure, but I think there's some things I can't talk about. Well, you probably see a little more of me in the future on, and I'm going to continue to support the organizations that are calling for open scholarly dialogue, rigorous discourse, and, hopefully a normalization of, academia and hopefully uh, a way forward for, society on issues related to gender that doesn't mean us, all hating each other and blowing things up, but it does mean correcting some of our errors.
Dr. Kristopher Kaliebe, thank you for joining me today.
Matt, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the full podcast. The Distance is an encampment for everyone made politically homeless by gender ideology. Visit our website at www.thedistancemag.com to support our work with a monthly or annual premium subscription.